Good afternoon, everybody. It's a vast room. Hi, down there. How you doing? If you want to come up the front, that's absolutely fine, because we can sort of huddle together a little bit. If you're more comfortable being an outlier, that's also fine too. You are in the Dynamic Coalition on Public Access in Libraries session. My name is Stuart Hamilton, and I'm from the Irish Local Government Management Agency, where I head the libraries development team. This afternoon, we've got a session for you which is going to look at policy. And in a moment, I'm going to explain a little bit more, but we're going to trace the line between policy and practice when it comes to public access and the role that libraries can play, particularly in connecting people and getting more people online, but also in upskilling and letting them have access to new services. This is I think I worked it out, this is the 8th time that the Dynamic Coalition has met. We formed in Nairobi in 2011, and I was reflecting that lots actually happened since 2011. A lot of good, a lot of bad on the internet, lots more people online, obviously, but maybe a little bit more concern about the sort of online environment that people are coming into. And then, of course, in the middle of that, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and we've got a brand new development framework for the world, and that's something we'll be touching on today. But I did think, when I was looking at that time frame, that actually in the last 8 years, public access has never stopped being vital. All through that time, the need for people to be able to access the internet in remote rural areas, or for people that don't have the economic means to have a really highly charged cell phone, places like libraries and other public access points are absolutely crucial. So as I said, today we'll talk about policy and the impact of using public access as a policy tool. The intention is to have a discussion on how public access, particularly through libraries, is included in national connectivity strategies, the sorts of things that support digital inclusion, and then as part of that to showcase a few different examples of what's happening around the world when government support turns policy into successful projects. So the aim here would be to sort of inform those of you who are interested in this and our broader community about where we're at in this sort of stage, and then maybe have a bit of a discussion, a bit of a reflection on what more governments and other stakeholders can do to use some of these strategies to get closer to the SDGs. I'm going to facilitate the session. We've got 4 speakers who I'm very pleased to have with us, and I'll introduce them when it's time. They're each going to make a short intervention on our topic. We're going to hear about things about national development policies, broadband plans, the state of affordable access to the internet, and how investment in public access can support that. And then we'll hear about the impact of policy implementation on the ground in Uganda and Kenya, and what happens when you make these investments and how they play out. As I say, our speakers are great experts with great knowledge, and those of you here I really would like to encourage to get involved when the time comes. The IGF is about dialogue, and I hope that you'll have a few questions to test them on, so that I don't end up having to ask all the difficult ones I've kept in reserve for them at the end. It does fall to me to make the first sort of intervention aside from that introduction, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why we think public access in libraries is actually a strategic issue for the IGF to consider even 8 years after we started. We formed the Dynamic Coalition with a simple premise, that public libraries can offer innovative services based on free public access to the internet, and by doing that, make a positive change in their communities with regards to areas like health, agriculture, employment, education, and marginalised groups. And within the IGF, we've actually been quite productive, and if you weren't aware, we've produced principles on public access, and in fact, in front of you on the tables, we've got a little handout that has a few things that give a bit of background on our framing of public access. We've contributed to the intersessional work on the policy options for connecting and enabling the next billions. We've presented case studies of libraries providing internet connectivity to achieve the SDGs, and we've developed something called the Public Access Toolkit, which outlines the key policy elements and steps that you could use to create this sort of policy environment for increasing access. And we've used that with our own community to help library associations, who are key stakeholders for us, engage in advocacy at national levels. We've also participated and have participants from the Partnership for Public Access, or P4PA, where we formed partnerships with organisations and institutions from different sectors, so across the private sector, other parts of civil society. And some of the P4PA activities include a project in Tunisia focused on digital literacy and coding, and then also contributions to the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation. So that's just to give you some background that if you do go to where we live on the IGF web pages, if you have a look there, you'll find product from us. And we're always asking ourselves within this environment a very simple question. Are the stakeholders at the IGF utilising public libraries to the best of their ability? Why do we ask that? Because we have over 400,000 public libraries worldwide. And I don't think there's another stakeholder within the UN conversations, maybe with the exception of the post offices, that actually have over 400,000 physical space points all over the world that can be utilised to increase access. So if you think about that, a lot of our discussions concern online services, but here we're talking about physical locations staffed by over 600,000 library workers. So a combination of space and expertise makes us a pretty unique stakeholder within the IGF environment. So are we actually utilising this? And we're asking this question because we believe that the policies that are often discussed within the UN, the IGF, need to actually reach down and impact at a local level, or else basically they're just words on a piece of paper. And with libraries, you're going to get a package that will bring you right into the community. We're community hubs, we're on the ground. We're sustainable institutions, we're publicly funded. We can deliver policy objectives in that we're policy partners, and in fact we're quite promiscuous in that we generally tend to partner with anybody that can actually make a project happen for the good of the people in the community. And we can reach the parts of the community that other actors can't. We have a specific focus on marginalised groups. We can work with young people, children, adults. We can look at gender imbalances. We can actually really target where we want to work. And we can deliver on all of these fronts, which is why I think we can deliver to nearly all of the Sustainable Development Goals. And much in the same way as if you go into a library, I can probably pull you out a book on any subject that you desire. I can probably show you a program somewhere in the world right now that's working on some part of the SDGs. So for all of these reasons, we see a very strong rationale for including libraries in national development strategies and for public access to the internet to be considered a strategic issue. And then that's why we're looking here at a key element of that, and that's broadband. That's the role that broadband can take, or can play rather, in taking our actions to the next level. Basically because all the cool things we do are amplified by better connectivity. And I know this through my work in Ireland, where the government has invested heavily in the public library sector in recent years. All of the libraries are connected to the internet, and the programs that the government wants to achieve, there's three main ones that we work with. One is around reading and literacy, called Right to Read. One is about business and employment, it's called Work Matters. And the other one is around health and well-being, it's called Healthy Ireland at Your Library. All of these are delivered by the libraries as part of a bigger plan that the government has. So we're sitting within a government policy framework, and we're supported to do that, and we're supported to upskill our staff with government resources. So we are benefiting through that government connection, but also the way that the government is now going to invest in high-speed broadband rollout across the country. It's not the case in every country that the library is lucky enough to be connected to these conversations, but when they are, you can make the magic happen. And we're going to hear some examples of that as we move through. It's not just Ireland that has this. We've got real live people who are working on this, but throughout our network we can see real impact when you get going properly here. Since 2014, we have something called a Public Library Innovation Programme, which is run by an organisation who's part of the Dynamic Coalition, a founding member called Electronic Information for Libraries. They trained 1,000 librarians in Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia and Namibia, and off the back of that, they've trained 500,000 library users in how to use the internet, how to understand emerging digital skills, and how to develop community services. We've seen libraries in the Philippines connect to government educational programs, an inclusion initiative called Tech4Ed, saw the Philippine Employment Administration work with the library community there to help more than 10,000 people who work in the diaspora abroad renew online applications to send money back to their families. And then in Guatemala, there's a library that serves 14,000 people from indigenous communities that's helped them set up businesses around basket weaving and local arts and crafts. So basically the outcome of projects that connect government policy and funding and resourcing with public libraries are basically individuals and communities who are more ready to deal with digital challenges and ultimately in many cases end up with better education or in fact more money in their pocket through the opportunities that come out. So with all this in mind, I thought today's session, we thought that we would have a look at who else around the world is implementing some of these options around policies in national broadband and working towards digital inclusion through libraries. And we're going to do this by starting with a review of a new piece of research which has been carried out by the teams at the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, or IFLA, and IFL, who I've already mentioned, which compares how national broadband plans engage and use libraries, and then highlight the different roles that policymakers see for us. Once we've done that, our three invited speakers will bring their perspectives to the table and, as I said, share experience of some of the government programs which have looked to realise the potential that I've mentioned. After each intervention, we can go straight into some questions about what you've just heard, or we can save our questions for the end. I don't know if we have any remote participants, but if people are with us online, then I welcome them. And we'll be taking questions. If the people at the back just give me a wave, then I'll basically bring in our remote participants. So our first panelist is Valencia Trezvenikova, which is the best I can do at this stage. Valencia is the Policy and Research Officer at the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. She has a background in public administration, so she's been thrown out of that straight into the library world at IFLA in The Hague. And right now she's working on internet governance and digital matters from the library sector's perspective. And today she's going to introduce us to the research which underpins this session, which we're going to be able to share with you very soon, which is the recent analysis of libraries in national broadband plans. Valencia, over to you. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for everyone for joining us here today. So, let me start with the following. A recently released State of Broadband 2019 report includes the following recommendation: include public access in places such as libraries, international broadband plans, and universal access strategies. This recommendation is largely intended to facilitate affordability, so to overcome cost barriers of either internet services or access devices. But as Stuart has pointed out, there are other benefits to public access, particularly public access in libraries. And in fact, in light of this potential, there are already over 30 countries that reference libraries in their national broadband plans and policies. And as we move forward, it is useful to see how libraries have already been included in broadband plans and strategies to this day. Such an overview can reveal the scope and the range of roles that libraries can play in connectivity strategies, as well as the type of support they may need to do so. This has been the focus of the DC-PAL project this year, comparing how different national broadband policies implicate and engage libraries. We took the broadbandpolicy.org tool as a starting point. It allows for keyword search of broadband policy documents in over 92 countries, and this allowed us to get an initial list of countries, just over 30. Combining that with the list of broadband policies from the State of Broadband 2019 report, we ended up with a list of policy documents to analyze and go through. So across all of these policy documents, where do libraries come in? The first thing we have noticed is that when it comes to broadband strategies, libraries frequently come into play in several distinct contexts. The first one is obviously public access. Examples of policies that frame libraries in light of public access include, for example, Nigeria or Botswana. This is mentioned as a remedy for digital divides, whether on an individual level in terms of affordability or supporting broader vulnerable groups, the unemployed people, low-income families, and so on and so forth. As an additional function, public access in places such as libraries have been pointed out to facilitate access to e-government services, online public services, or facilitate participation in online digital economy. The second context is digital literacy and ICT skills. Policy documents in Hungary or Turkey, for example, mention libraries in this context. There are different models here, either training the trainers and helping librarians later help their users make use of computers, or even simply using libraries as venues for other actors to carry out literacy initiatives. The third context is supporting educational institutions. Several broadband plans refer to libraries with an emphasis on broader educational goals. This ranges from e-learning opportunities or digitizing educational materials, or even establishing electronic libraries in existing academic institutions. Examples of broadband policies that bring forward the educational angle include, for instance, Mauritius or Cameroon. And finally, the last context is heritage digitization and consequent local content creation. There are broadband strategies that highlight the role of libraries in creating local content through digitization, for example, Mali or Switzerland. And this can be particularly important for non-English speaking countries. We have broadband plans in both Portugal or Turkey highlight the need to create content in local languages. Point 2 is the focus of the policy intervention. What does the policy aim to do to allow libraries to fulfill those roles? In many cases, the aim is to improve library connectivity, and this can entail different elements, whether it is connecting libraries to broadband infrastructure, which is spelled out, for instance, in Jamaica, Egypt, or Mauritius. And this can also include electricity supply, by the way. Plans in both Kenya and Botswana point out that for library connectivity, electricity is crucial. Alongside connectivity infrastructure, several broadband plans seek to address the ongoing costs of internet subscriptions. For example, in the United States or, again, Mauritius, some broadband plans focus on providing computers or connectivity hardware or communication technologies to libraries, such as those in Nigeria, Jamaica, or Bangladesh. And finally, in rare cases, the need to equip library staff with necessary ICT skills is also mentioned, Bulgaria being one example that we have come across. And for the policy's focus on digitization, the focus has often been broadly defined in terms of either digitization targets, organizing or coordinating digitization activities, or creating digital platforms or e-libraries. So that is the what. And then there is the how. How do we achieve those things, and how do we help library connectivity? Well, some policies envision interventions that target libraries at large. Along such broad interventions are those spelled out in the plans in Bahamas or Bangladesh. They often include financial mechanisms such as connectivity subsidies or technology procurement for libraries. These are not uncommon. In other cases, there is the public access point model. So as a starting point, we take not the need to connect a separate type of institutions at large, but rather the need for a given community to be connected. And then in those areas, they select certain anchor institutions that will be connected and provided an entire package: software, hardware, connectivity, infrastructure. And libraries often feature in those projects. Select libraries are often chosen as fitting well for these purposes. Frequently, or well, not frequently, but in some cases, a Universal Service Access Fund has been mentioned as a way to implement those activities. And another mechanism frequently mentioned was public-private partnerships. Canada's Connect to Innovate program, for example, envisions broadband rollout initiatives that are carried out jointly with the private sector. And in other plans, the approaches to achieving digitization goals at times relied on softer instruments, such as coordinating activities or adopting interoperable formats and open standards, for instance, in Turkey or in Portugal, respectively. And that was the how. Looking over the entire set, a few final remarks can be made. Most country policies in the set we have examined so far include more than one policy target, more than one instrument. So hopefully this potentially reflects an understanding that library connectivity needs are multifaceted. And this can also reflect the understanding that libraries can play more than one role in connectivity and broadband strategies in a given nation. And different libraries can come into play. In many cases, the policy was targeting libraries at large, or in frequent cases, public libraries. But we also have references to national libraries, academic, or even school libraries. And based on the inclusion of various policy documents in the policies we've examined so far, several broad types of approaches can be suggested. First one is policies that improve connectivity of all or most libraries in the country. A subcategory of that would be policies that involve a universal service fund. A second type would be public access point type projects, where libraries are one of the anchor institutions chosen to play a role in community connectivity. An interesting category to look at would be the projects and policies that include digital literacy initiatives, whether targeting libraries at large or libraries among other institutions. And finally, we have digitization initiatives and other software instruments. So these categories reflect the most common ways libraries are engaged in broadband plans and strategies. And looking at these allows us to reflect on how libraries have already been included in broadband plans and strategies, the scope of activities they can carry out, and the kind of support they need to be able to fulfill those roles.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious, how long did it take to do the piece of research? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the methodology and how many, you mentioned there's about 30 plans involved. I mean, what's the geographical spread?
Absolutely. We have been working on this project on and off, not full time, roughly since July of this year. And at the moment, I believe we have a set of 32 countries. They are the countries and the documents that we have analyzed are listed in the annex of the draft that has been made available right before this session, which can be reached at the email, at the web address that is included in the leaflets. And your other question was about methodology.
Yes, so what were you examining what was the corpus you were examining to find the plans?
Absolutely. So as a starting point, we take a list of countries from the broadbandpolicy.org tool, which just allows for a keyword search among a list of uploaded policy documents. Then having a list of countries, we have looked at what has been classified as their formal broadband policy by the Broadband Commission. And plus, if a document that is cited in the broadbandpolicy.org has not been included in the set, if it's still a relevant document, that we still included it in the set. And then we scan the documents for mentions of libraries, public access, as well as examples of other anchor institutions like schools or universities to make sure that we're not missing out policies that are targeted at a large variety of anchor institutions.
Mm-hmm. Anybody have any quick comments or questions from what we've heard there from Valencia? Just immediate? Okay. Okay, well, Nena, it looks like you're going to get the first chance to comment then. Nena, how do I say your second name?
Just say Nena.
Nena is the Chief Web Advocate at the World Wide Web Foundation. And she's also been working on something which I'm sure many of us have seen this week in the news, which is the contract for the web. What we've asked her to talk about today is really to comment on this sort of situation overall, but really to talk about libraries and public access and affordability strategies, which is something I know you've been working on in recent years. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I noticed that the ascenseur, the lift was not working. So if you are here, it means you took the staircase. Congratulations. So thank you very much for coming. I think I've spoken a whole lot about the contract for the web, which Tim Berners-Lee launched on Monday, and we've been talking about it. However, I want to begin on a personal note. I got connected to the internet early in 1998, 1999. I was a student, I was doing postgraduate studies and also working with the African Development Bank. And my most reliable connection was at the university library. So I'm grateful for that. When I say my name is Nena, I come from the internet, I want to be grateful to the Library Society, an organization, and on behalf of the Alliance for Affordable Internet, of which you're a member, I also want to give a shout out to librarians and libraries across the world for being the last mile for millions of people across the world out there. I want to talk a bit more about the things that affect inclusion. The first is about rights, about the policy framing for inclusion. I had spoken earlier on the high-level panel about REACT, about rights, education, access, content and targets. Now, in most places, libraries are the most political organizations. And so we accept them, we know them, we trust them. And this is very important for new digital natives. People who are coming into the digital world are not afraid to go to libraries, because this is where analog and digital come together. It's a good maternity to be born into the digital world. I'm trying to be very, very simple with my language, because I know there are people online I have invited to listen to this. So I'll be speaking to you as if you don't know anything about big IGF technology and terminology. So the first thing is that libraries are a very good place for people to migrate from analog to digital. The second is the community spirit of the library. Sometimes these things, we think digital is about technology. It has never been about technology. It has been about how people use technology. How many of you still remember your library days? How many of you, Stuart, did you give your girlfriend a rendezvous at the library?
Absolutely.
Because no parent of any girl will object to you going to the library. That's where things happened. So libraries have a community spirit, and it's a good place for people to meet. And this is what we might be missing as we go more broadband and more 5G and more personalized. The other thing that sometimes we forget that we try to bring to the table in policy issues is gender responsiveness. We worry about artificial intelligence, we worry about the digital divide, the gender digital divide, but libraries are one of the most gender responsive areas. They are open, they are welcoming to all genders. I want to come back on some of the work we've done on universal access funds. Universal access funds, we've had them. They were supposed to extend access to the last mile to populations that were underserved. And the study that we did at the World Wide Web Foundation shows that most of the funds are lying there idle and not being used. And we believe that these are places that universal access funds need to serve. I want to come back to meaningful connectivity. I think we did talk about it because for us to be really inclusive, we have said speed of the connectivity, broadband speed. We need reliable connectivity and uninterrupted connectivity, and we also need affordability and devices that are capable of giving us that capacity that we need. Now, what I want to say here is that while we are struggling, while we are working to connect the other half of the world, while we are waiting for everybody to be fully equipped, to be fully educated, to be fully compliant, to be fully 5G or 4G, libraries are here for us. And we actually have one of our partners from Universal Access Fund in Benin who would have wanted to be in this room. But the point is, post offices and libraries are community centers, de facto community centers. These are de facto gender responsive spaces. These are de facto community spaces. These are de facto places where analog can easily transform into digital. And I want to end with something. I know you're sitting here in Berlin and most of you are from the global north. Technology still scares people. Technology still scares women. The good thing about being in a library environment is that there is always help. You don't call it help desk. You don't use those big computer names, but there is always someone who is willing to help you. And this is what many people need, whether it is in digital security, whether it is in skills, whether it is being able to carry your voice as a person, there is always help at the library. I'm bringing in all of these Because when we talk about ICT policy, people think we are talking big technology. I want you to begin to rethink the way you see libraries and their role. And I'm speaking to you as IFLA as well. Don't just see it as books and technology. See it as a means of getting people from where we are to where we want to be. And if it is the digital home of people, if this is the maternity where digital citizens are being given birth to, what else are we looking for? Is that not the reason we came here?
I like that very much. I'm used to hearing a lot in the advocacy work I do that libraries are not just books, because people then want to talk about how libraries are actually technology. I like the idea that now I can say, well, libraries are not just books and technology. They are a means of taking us where we need to go. I have a very quick follow-up question, which it was about the research that you've done into the universal access funds, and you said that a lot of them are lying dormant. I'll ask this question now because I think it will frame some of the conversation we'll go on to have. Why are they lying dormant? I'm curious.
I'm not going to prevent you from downloading that report and reading it by yourself, but most of these are policy related. And one of the things that A4AI is doing is actually helping countries redraft their universal access fund policies, which is what we've done in Mozambique, and we hope to be doing, we're already doing in Benin Republic. Now, if you recall, universal access funds were put in place years ago when we were talking about telecommunications. They were brought from telecommunications tax. If you recall, in the MDGs, we didn't even have ICT in the mention. And then we've moved to SDGs, and we still don't have huge technology mention. Technology is mostly found in Goal 9 and Goal 5. You see where we're coming in from the digital gender divide. So that is how we can slip it in. So you find countries who don't have a clear view about where this funding should go. And by the time you do all the political battles, the years are gone. If you allow me, I will mention the case of Brazil, for instance, where it's gone to court and the Supreme Court has just frozen the funds. And it's like, you hold on until we see clearly. So we have a bit of these funds that are in court. Some are for policy reasons, some are planification. So those are some of the reasons and other reasons, but I'm not going to tell you all. Please go to A4AI, A4AI. A, the letter, the number 4, A4AI.org. Read, first of all, the affordability report, and read our report on universal access funds.
Thanks. I think that's kind of interesting what you raised there about the lack of mentions to ICT and internet access in the actual targets of the SDGs themselves. It's interesting to think that that might be causing some confusion as to where to allocate sort of funds. I think that's something I might come back and pick up on. But before we do that, I'm going to move on to our next speaker. So Nena, myself, we've often worked in that sort of big, broader policy environment. We've heard about research into some of these policies. Our last two speakers are actually kind of working to implement those policies, and as such, I think it's an extremely interesting angle to the discussion we're having today. Paul Kiaj is joining us from Kenya, where he works with the Universal Service Funds, and he's working at the Communications Authority in Kenya. Paul, do we need to get your slides set up whilst I introduce you, or are you in good shape? Could we get the PowerPoint? Perfect, excellent. So Paul's got nearly 20 years of experience working in monitoring and evaluation and project management. And presently, as I say, he's the Assistant Director at the Universal Service Fund at the Communications Authority of Kenya, where he's providing strategic leadership in the development and implementation of USF projects. And he's going to be talking to us today about the Communication Authority's strategic partnership with the Kenya National Library Service to support ICT integration in library services in the country. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Stuart. As been said, my name is Paul Kiage. I work for Communications Authority of Kenya, which is the regulatory agency in charge of licensing of telecommunication, broadcasting, and postal and courier service providers in Kenya. In addition to that, the authority is also in charge of supporting the implementation of universal access projects in Kenya. of which I'm here to present to you what we have done with the Kenya National Library Services. Thank you. So I'll take you through my slides. The first one being where USF is placed within the authority. And the authority has 3 strategic objectives, of which the Universal Service Fund sits under access and market development, with the sole objective of supporting widespread access to ICT services in Kenya. And that is what we are responsible for. And it is the one shaded in red on the slide. The next one is the intervention that has been done by the authority through strategic partnership with the Kenya National Library Service. It started way back in 2012, where we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Kenya National Library Service. First of all, to start on a pilot basis, supporting 10 libraries. And later on, this was scaled up to cover all the libraries in Kenya. And the partnership entailed supporting ICT integration, and mainly this involved supporting the installation of LAN cabling in all the libraries in Kenya, supplying 10 computers to each of those libraries, provision of internet connectivity to the libraries, support the supply of digital, the card printers, which enable the members to register and their cards printed. In addition, we also supported capacity building and training of librarians and digitization of content within those libraries. The scope or the cost of the support is to the amount of $2.1 million US, and that is covered in those components that I read much earlier. And where these libraries is located in Kenya, that map shows you the spread of those libraries in the country. So we have presence across most of the counties in Kenya, with a few having, say, more than one library. In terms of, that is just the official launch of the partnership. So that is the leadership of the Communications Authority and the Kenya National Library Service in 2012 when this partnership was actualized. In very remote areas where we don't have connectivity to the national grid, the authority supplied solar panels to enable these libraries run the computers. So this is one of the such libraries, very remote in rural areas. This is just a pictorial of the support that the authority gave to the 62 libraries in Kenya, the PCs, the furniture, and the connectivity. So that is continuation of the pictorial support. And in terms of project achievement, this project has achieved a lot in terms of the numbers. We've seen an incremental increase in the number of users within those libraries, whether students or community members are utilizing these libraries to access digital content, be they e-government services like applying for your passport, ID, or filing tax returns within those libraries. They also get e-health services, including access to e-market information, where the farmers go to access the prevailing market prices for their livestock or crops within those libraries. We've also seen that these libraries have been used as access points for the community members, particularly those who are marginalized and are living with disabilities. They have been able to access a lot of information because we were able to get appropriate assistive softwares which enable persons with disabilities to interact with technology. It has also attracted other strategic partners like Digital Opportunity Trust, Microsoft, Intel Corporation, among many others. So we've seen a lot of achievement in terms of increasing universality and accessibility using these libraries. And then lastly, under some of the lessons learned, we've seen that when you leverage on the strength of partnerships, you can increase accessibility in the use of ICTs. Then there is a need to capacity build the library administrators to be enabled to pass the same information to various people who are also visiting these libraries. We have also seen that we can get better from what we do by integrating ICTs into this library so that the libraries don't just serve or just avail books to the users, but can also be able to integrate the use of ICTs within those access points. Then we've also seen that digital technologies can be used by persons with disabilities to be able to change their lives. So with those few remarks, I say thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I have a quick kind of follow-up question, actually, because there's good stuff there about the impact of the project. I wondered, in some ways, why did the government do it? So what were the reasons? What did it take to get the project off the ground? I mean, who was advocating for it? And sort of what arguments were being made that in the end made the government want to go for it?
Thank you so much for that question. Why did the government use it? When you look around the countryside, these libraries provided a good opportunity for public access to communities, students, and even government officials who are working in remote areas. So traditionally, they're known to host books, but we found that it was an opportunity to integrate ICTs into this library so that we could attract more users to the libraries, as we've seen incremental increase in the number of users visiting the libraries. But more so for the government, it provided us as an opportunity now to fulfill our mandate of extending or increasing access to ICTs to those marginalized populations which hitherto could not access ICTs. Thank you.
And I noted that it started in 2012. Is it an ongoing project? Is there a commitment to keep funding?
As I said, it has attracted many more partners. So I think the project is self-sustaining, even without the government support. So it is able to run without further funding. But we've covered all the libraries in the country.
It's the dream we all dream, a project that requires no more further funding and goes. But it's a very good example of what happens when the government is prepared to utilize that existing infrastructure and to go for it. And I think we're going to hear a little bit more along these lines. I'm going to ask Emmanuel to speak now. Emmanuel Muyomba is the project management or the project manager at the Rural Communications Development Fund next door in Uganda. And today he's going to be talking about his focus work that he's been doing on broadband. I read your bio, Emmanuel. You've got responsibilities I think we can all sympathise with by making your projects deliver on time within budget but at a high level of quality. Good man, you come and work for me. Today we're going to be talking, or you're going to be talking about ICT public access facilities within the public libraries project that you're working on with the National Library of Uganda and Electronic Information for Libraries. So the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Stuart. Nina mentioned that several funds are idle. The funds are not used. I wish they could pass them on to Uganda. We've got a lot to do. We could make use of those. In Uganda, We have close to 30 million people who are still offline, yet our population is 44 million people. So that makes about 68% of the population which is still offline. They don't have access and they are not using the internet. And we know one of the reasons for this is the lack of access devices, but also because some can't afford to pay for the internet, given the economic situation of some of the people. The cost is still a bit prohibitive. The other reason is lack of digital literacy skills in especially the rural areas. So the Uganda Communications Commission, through the Rural Communications Development Fund, which I work for, partnered with the National Libraries of Uganda in order to use the public libraries as a place where people can access internet and where people can get digital skills. In this project, we have partners like the Electronic Information for Libraries, which carries out trainings for the librarians to enable them to have responsive services to the communities in which they exist. 3 weeks ago, I visited the 3 of the libraries which we supported in the first place to find out what they are doing with the facilities we've set in place, and also to know the challenges that they have. And I was surprised to find that they are doing everything you could imagine which you use for the internet. There are students who do research from these libraries. We've got university campuses which don't have libraries in the rural areas. So their students go to the public libraries to carry out their research and to do their coursework. There are also people who are pursuing online courses from international universities or from deeper academic institutions which are not within Uganda, who go to these public libraries to do their online study. I also discovered that the people use the government e-services from the libraries. Recently, there was a need by the Ministry of Education to have teachers register on the teacher management information system. And many of the teachers don't have personal laptops or personal computers, and it's the libraries where they go to do this. People also do tax returns from the libraries, and they also do internet banking from these facilities. So the outcomes of our project include the fact that we now have libraries with computers and internet access where the public can go and use these services free of charge. So this takes away the cost barrier for some of the people who are offline because of the cost. On average, you get about 35 people in each library per day. And we've had library staff trained by EFL to offer community-based library services. The public also uses these libraries to access Wi-Fi. Those who have their own devices like smartphones and laptops just have to go into the environs of the libraries to access the internet through the Wi-Fi. Some of the challenges we've found in the project include unreliable electricity in these areas. The grid is not so reliable in some of these rural areas. The cost of maintaining and sustaining these facilities is a bit high, because currently the service is offered free of charge. The Uganda Communications Commission, through the Rural Communications Development Fund, is the one meeting the cost of the internet bandwidth, but would prefer to have the libraries or the communities in which they exist to be the ones sustaining these facilities. There's also limited physical space for these facilities. And in many cases, you find that the reading space is the one used for the computing. So where someone would want to use multimedia services, maybe make VoIP calls through the internet, there would be an inconvenience to the other library users. Also currently, there's no user management software in the libraries, because they would perhaps want to limit how much time each user is allocated, because the users are many and the libraries are few. That's another challenge. There are many users, but computers themselves are limited. So the way forward, we are phasing this project because of limited funds. We roll out a few every year as the funds allow, and in Uganda so far, we've covered 10 libraries out of the 47 public libraries. Thank you. I've got a short video from the users of the facilities. Please watch to get it from their own mouth, their experience.
Myself, Talimo Ivan. I've come from Blessed Hope Secondary School, Nakaseke. I'm in form period. The reason as to why I come at Nakaseke Public Library is that at our school we are unable to access internet due to the fact that we don't have enough computers. So I come to our library, since it's a public library, to access internet.
I'm Tumesi Jeffrey, the in charge of Hoima Public Library. I'm grateful to Uganda Communication Commission through Rural Communication Development Fund that enabled this library to have internet access. Indeed, this project has helped the community through various ways of accessing up-to-date information.
The community has benefited quite well, because when you look back, we did not have enough computers for the users to train on and also do their typesetting work from.
And the Wi-Fi also, we can also use them to surf in our phones.
And one of the things that we already benefit from here, one of them is free internet access. And with that free internet access, it's quite easy to do more research about what was taught. It helps you to communicate with other people when you want to submit your coursework. More so if it has to be submitted online. Sometimes you'll also use it to read the news or the newspapers and find out what is going on.
As I began by appreciating UCC
meeting for local computers. Actually, we are very happy for accessing internet services in this library. That as for us users, at least there is an easy way of accessing internet. It has been spurred in Palsa here to access internet since we had no internet cafes. But by now it is very cheap. We are accessing internet here. We can download, we can check on apps. We are so glad to use wireless internet on our phones. Wi-Fi, which has enabled us to WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, actually send mails. Actually, it's very easy to update files to friends. And also, users actually have been able to access e-registration services here. That it has been simplified, free internet. It's very easy to access with a higher speed. It's very easy for us to download files now, so it has been so hard. So we appreciate everything in the library.
So that for me is great, because it enables those of us in the room here to really actually see that what we're talking about, when the policies that we're writing down on paper are implemented, we can see real change in the communities. And I'm struck by the commentary of the people in the video and why the library is so important to them, because actually I hear the same words when I meet users in Irish libraries. So these are universal needs that are happening at the same time in Uganda, in Kenya, and also in the country where I'm currently working, and libraries are solving those problems. Before we move on to a bit of discussion, I did have the same question for you, Emmanuel. Why did the government decide to go for it? Who persuaded you, or did you come up with the idea yourself? I mean, I'm intrigued as to what made the project happen.
Thank you. We knew that there was a need for public access because we knew that one of the challenges which is stopping some of the people from getting online is lack of access devices, and also because some cannot afford. So for synergies, we needed a partner who is out there in the communities, and the library was a good place to do this project. Because much as we're putting in the computers and giving them the internet, they already have the physical space, and they're already open to everyone without any biases, be it gender or age. Because the RCDF mission is to ensure through targeted interventions that location, physical inability, gender, and cost are not barriers to access broadband for any sector of Uganda's population. So the library is one of the partners we could work with to achieve this.
Thanks. So I know we do have a question that's come in remotely, I think, but this is one of the first times when we've done one of these panels that we've been lucky enough to have two colleagues from government, civil society and policy development, but in terms of people that actually work in libraries, we're a little bit light. And I understand we have a colleague from the German library sector who I've not met before, who's sitting very close and paying great attention. Welcome. I wondered if you had any comments or any thoughts from the perspective of the community here.
Yes, hi. I don't have comments. Actually, Valencia asked me to talk a bit about the situation in Germany. If you want to, I can do that now or later.
Sounds like comments to me.
Yeah.
That's why we came to Germany. We want to hear what's going on here.
Okay, great. So yes, my name is Jacqueline Breidlid. I indeed work for the German Libraries Association. So not within an actual library, but for the association. We represent Germany's around 10,000 scientific and public libraries. Our goal is of course to strengthen libraries so that these can provide citizens with free access to information. I'd just like to give you maybe a little insight into the situation in Germany and the sort of issues we work on with regard to digital inclusion. And the three main aspects we see on that is libraries as a venue for providing connectivity, secondly, as a place to access digital resources, and thirdly, as a place where users can get digital skills. So with regard to the issue of being a venue for providing connectivity. Actually, the picture in Germany is quite mixed. So if you look at the 80% of libraries, if you look at the libraries that are managed on a full-time basis, over 80% of those are connected to the internet. So that's quite a high number. But if you look at those libraries that are managed on a part-time or on a voluntary basis and that are mostly in rural areas, actually only about 20% are connected. So the picture is not as good in Germany either, and that is why the German Library Association is actually calling for a nationwide expansion of network infrastructure, so that also the very small libraries in the rural areas get connection. And that's one of the issues we actually talk about in our report on the state of libraries in Germany. I brought a copy with me today, so feel free to pass by and get a copy later on. With regard to accessing digital resources, so accessing e-books, e-journals, movies, etc., we believe that e-books are a particularly important resource, and libraries in Germany do offer e-books, but often in a restricted manner because of difficult licensing conditions. So another thing that the German Library Association is calling for is legal equality between physical books and e-books. And then finally to digital skills, I want to sort of end on a bit of a more positive note and just tell you about the project that we're managing. It's called Total Digital, so totally digital, and it aims at providing youngsters with both digital and reading skills. So I just want to show you one of the projects. It's a comic that was basically made by youngsters. You'll see it here. And what the youngsters did was to write the story for a comic themselves. Then they took pictures of themselves acting out the story, and finally they used a computer program to turn it all into a comic book. So a very fun and playful manner of learning about both digital skills and getting reading skills. So I would just, like to make you aware of our report. I also have some information on this program, Total Digital, and maybe to make you aware of a website or a portal called Biblio 2030. And there you can actually see practical examples of what libraries in Germany do in terms of advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think it's a very good resource to actually get some practical examples. Thank you.
So I want to open it up now. We've heard, I think at least, obviously I'm on the libraries team, some really good examples of why libraries should be included in national development plans. And yet we've seen research where I think we've got 32 countries where that's actually happening, which leaves us with a lot of other countries that we need to get out there and reach. So I just want to open up the floor to those of you in the room with any observations on what you've heard, any questions for our panelists, or anything you want to share from the situation that you find in your own country. And your hand's up first, sir, so
mine is
Can you introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Mine is a question. My name is James Longole from USF, Kenya. I would like to, from the presenter so far, one of the things that has not been mentioned is how communities are able to sustain on their own without external support the services they're accessing from the library. Because when you say marginalized or rural, the assumption we are making is that they are not even able to a great extent to afford, financially, some of the services they hold to be able, some of the services they're coming for at the libraries. So how do you plan, as now spearheaders of, at the policy level of this initiative, how do you plan, what mechanisms have you put in place to ensure that even without the external support, these communities are able to sustain these services for the next, let's say, 50 or 30 years. That's one. Number two, again, when you say rural or marginalized, again, one of the things that comes up is most of these communities are not able to write and read. So are there linkages you have created with the similar institutions, let's say academic in nature, so that there is a balance between motivating these communities, let's say, to go to school to be able to access these services? Otherwise, the way you might have packaged it, it's just going to remain an elitist debate, because what is this that, for example, would motivate me from being in the village, or maybe I stay near a library and I'm not able to read and write, but I'm able to say, okay, there's a library here with these services, and therefore I have to go to, let's say, for an adult education class to be able to use these services found at the library.
Let's take that on, although I will be asking my expert colleagues to pick that up. Who would like to say something? Paul, you're reaching for the mic.
Thank you so much, James, for that question. I think on the sustainability, what we've seen is that once you open up these centers and equip them with the appropriate devices or the computers and connectivity, these centers have attracted other partners, like I'd mentioned Digital Opportunity Trust, I would mentioned Microsoft, Intel coming to offer certain courses within these facilities and offer certification to the students who come here. And over time, even the agencies that manage the libraries see interest on the digital content, and they open up to look up for resources to sustain the connectivity. And that's what we've seen in Kenya, when many other actors have come on board, and even the library itself has created a budget line for the connectivity beyond the initial support that the authority supported. Thank you.
I would say for sustainability in Uganda, what we're doing, we're encouraging the libraries to allow free access, maybe by a limited time, depending on the demand. Then beyond that time, they could charge a small fee in order to be able to sustain, to be able to generate some money to pay for the internet subscription. Already by taking the internet, you've taken away the installation costs and all the initial costs associated with providing the internet. So sustaining just subscription costs, it's money they can raise. But we do pay for the subscription for the initial 2 years. And also they provide other services which are not free of charge, like printing and scanning documents. They charge a small fee, but we advise them in all cases to keep their fees below what it would cost in the market, in the open market. Yeah. But they also get funding from the local governments in the areas where they exist. So this can help to sustain these projects. The second question was on digital literacy. The objective, we partnered with libraries, was to create a technological infrastructure for internet access there to enable local communities receive basic ICT training as well as gain access to online resources. So the communities do get training from the same facilities in the case of Uganda.
First of all, Mr. Chair, I must apologize because once I stop speaking, I'll walk through that door because there's another panel waiting for me. From the policy perspective, is the library under the budget of education or the budget of infrastructure, ICT infrastructure? I think that's one question I want to leave here before I go away, because it is very important to get the policy perspective right. If we do not classify libraries in such a way that they can get the funding from the universal access, get the funding from education, get the funding from social and women affairs, then we might not be able to have them sustainable. I don't know how many of you come from Africa. Maybe the question I will leave on the table is, what is happening to your post office? Because most post offices have had that issue of sustainability. And if we are not careful, libraries are going down the same way, in which we give them one role and one role alone. And if they cannot play that role, then they are going to die. And that is what I want to leave on the table. We need to have a sit down and have a policy re-evaluation of the role of public libraries. And know that they are in mainstream education, know that they are in digital infrastructure, know that they are in skills, and know that they are in community development. Otherwise, we will overlook them in our SDG implementation, and if we are not careful, what is happening to most post offices in Africa will happen to these libraries. I live across West Africa, and I want to share with you what I've seen. What I've seen now is that people like yourself and myself are saying, we build libraries. So there are citizen-led library initiatives where people bring in books, old books from their kids, and people bring in a few laptops and a few handheld devices, and coupled with community connections, they get the libraries up and running. So I still want to put this on the table. I don't know if we have these initiatives that come into corporate social responsibility, but I truly believe that libraries are here to stay. Now, whether it is the government that will ensure their sustainability, or it is us as citizens that will have to take it upon ourselves, I do not know. But I want to leave that on the table and ask you whether you will allow the libraries die or you will make them leave. Thank you.
I might ask, I've got a question here before I go down to the end to the gentleman there. I mean, fortunately, I think I can say based on experience, you can go, you can go now, thank you very much. I think the question whether or not the libraries are dying is obviously a huge one, but I think after working in the area for 15 years, I think we've actually moved beyond that now in many, many places. One of the things Nena mentioned there is about the right location for the library service within the government structure. And in Ireland, where I work, things started to go very well for our sector when we were moved out of, I think, the Department of the Environment, which is a strange place, I think, to have the public library sector, into the Department for Rural and Community Development, which is a really good fit for what the government wants to achieve in that area, and has some connection to the gentleman's question around literacy and improving skills in that area, because that's a big focus in rural areas in Ireland as well. Anyway, Nico, I know you've got a question, and you're very much based in the community, or you've got comments, so I'm going to hand it over to you. Can you introduce yourself to everyone else?
Hi, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Nicolas Pache. I work for the Association for Progressive Communications. And and thank you for the amazing participations. I wish I would have had more chance to engage deeper in the DCE this year, but I'm happy that all these outcomes have come out of it. We have been running a project for the last 2 years in relation to community networks. That is a topic that is very much related to to libraries, in the sense that we serve the same population, and we are striving for the same goal, for everyone that want to have access to be able to have it. I'm actually very happy to hear that the Universal Service Funds agents from Uganda and Kenya, 2 countries that we have partners in, are here. It shows the willingness of the governments to open up and be exposed to these discussions that are so important. One of the things that I have heard from our colleague here in the back was in relation to how projects can be sustainable. And this is by far one of the most asked questions in relation to rural problems. And in general, I think one very big mistake that we make is to try to measure initiatives as if they were urban. We assume that things need to be measured with the same rule in the urban and in the rural. And we forget that the people that are in the rural areas are not only remote, and that is a lot to say already, but also they are in the most challenging situations that can be. In general, the market is not able to get to those places, and the states struggle to get to those places too. The Universal Service Fund probably have much less budget than the Telecommunication Ministry as a whole. So, like the capacity for states, and I relate a lot with your responsibility of bringing, like Universal Service is such a big name for an office. So the challenge is big and the resources are in general small. But we don't have to forget that these people are there in the most challenging situations. So measuring the problems with the same rule would be a mistake. Still, supporting communities in rural areas, I think it's a very important thing because if a service is of essential need for them, no matter if there's a business plan or a sustainability plan behind or not, once the service becomes essential for a community, the communities find their way to make it exist now and in the future. If you need examples for that, and I guess it's important to have them, water provision is one very strong example. Communities have figured it out for ages. And though they don't have enterprises that make sure that the water is there, the water is still there, and they are still having service. So, but one thing that we need to worry about, and I think the libraries and the Universal Service Fund entities can work together, is about the capital expenditures of having telecommunications infrastructure. The libraries in general are very well-known entities within the communities and also respected entities within the state infrastructure. So they can be liaisons with the communities when you do investment in infrastructure. By having this alliance in between the public sector, the mixed would be, because you can have community libraries that are in between public and private. They have a relationship, and being rooted in the territory, they can make effective use of the funds to get to the communities. But there are challenges in relation to libraries, and this is the one essential comment, and I will stop there because I can talk for a lot of time, that is in relation to how the spaces for accessing to telecommunication services. And in this place, I think it's the Achilles knee of libraries, in the sense that public spaces are not always the best place where you want to access information. There are certain sensitive information that can't be accessed, or you can be judged by accessing them on public spaces. So we need to work together, the libraries and the communities, to extend the coverage of the libraries to the communities, so community members can access the connectivity in those private spaces where they feel comfortable and can access the services and the information that they require in the privacy of their homes or whatever place they feel comfortable in. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say that some of the work that's going on in the Dynamic Coalition on Community Networks is very much connected with what we're doing, and that extension element is something which we need to explore more. There's a comment of the gentleman at the back, and then we'll come back to our panelists.
Thank you very much, and my apologies. I was on a panel for another session, but I wanted to join this conversation. And the last part I caught, and my name is Honorable Samuel Nate George. I'm a member of parliament from Ghana. And I heard the comments Inena made before she left. We've had to battle with these challenges in Ghana, but we've worked what I will call as a model that seems to be addressing this. You have the Ghana Libraries Authority that is responsible for all public libraries. Now, you've realized that many of these libraries, like she pointed out, are facing the challenges that post offices face. Now, what we decided to do was and our libraries are under the Ministry of Education. And in Ghana, the Ministry of Education gets about 10% of our GDP, or annual budget. So there was funding for the Ministry of Education, but libraries were not a priority for the Ministry of Education. So what we did was to look at another government agency called the Ghana Investment Fund for Electronic Communications. That comes under the Ministry of Communications. Now, what GIFEC does is, by law, all the mobile network operators in Ghana contribute 1% of their net revenue to this authority. So then GIFEC is funded to then be able to use it to do what we call last mile connectivity to rural communities. And then we decided that the library authority, if you have a library in an area, let's digitize our libraries. So the community libraries and the public libraries, we started a digitization drive using the funds available to GIFEC. So GIFEC takes it over, connects it to the internet, and then it's no longer just a library, but it becomes a skill acquisition center. So you can go there and read a book online, which has been digitized, or you can go there and actually get skills training in software or hardware development. So it's added a new dimension to what these libraries are. In areas where there were no libraries, we used GIFEC to build what we called enhanced community information centers. So these enhanced community information centers also give you access to digital material that you can access when you go in there. They've got laptops and desktops in there. And then there are also skills training that go in there. So you realize that these centers have now become the hub around which a lot of young people gravitate and find a source of livelihood. So it's no longer just about going there to read. The centers and libraries are no longer just for literate people who want to read a book, but for people who even want to get a digital skill. So you go there and you learn. So that's the model we've used. It's not perfect. There are challenges which we're trying to fix. On the issue of connectivity that you raised, for example, we have a solution that was developed by a Ghanaian company that just recently got awarded at the ITU that actually enables us to set up a 2G mast. That is 2G in some instances 3G. That brings connectivity. Even where there is no electricity, it runs on solar power. And so in areas where there's no connection to the national grid, Ghana has 84% national grid connection, but in that little 16% that is left, you can actually have this solar power access to the internet in there, and then internet connectivity and skills development there. So I thought I'll share this with you and see if we could look at replicating the model across. Thank you.
I think these new models are essential. We can't stay the same. That's been something which our communities sort of recognized a long time ago. Don, is that a comment from you? Now we're going to make everyone be very, very quickly because I'd like to hear last words from panelists as well.
Best here at the
Can
end.
You be quick, Don?
Thank you, Stuart. My name is Don Means with the Gigabit Libraries Network. I wanted to maybe add a data point and make a comment about the dynamic coalition. It might be helpful, maybe. One is that in the US, there are also people that lack access. Libraries provide internet access for 1/3 of the adult population. Roughly 80 million people, 14 and over, access the internet at a library. Most of them have another source of access, but they go to the library for a range of reasons, for speed, comfort, safety, whatever, for help in using it. So there's a whole array of meanings when we use the term access. In terms of dynamic coalition, it fostered the Partnership for Public Access since Sao Paulo. Actually, I think that's when it really started. This then has become the partnership P4PA.net is a coalition of IFLA, of IFL, IEEE, A for AI, the People-Centered Internet, and several others, which are making the case that universal public access can be achieved through three strategies that could accommodate almost any circumstance. One is, as Nico pointed out, community networks, public access centers like libraries, or even offline internet where there's just no backhaul at all. That could accommodate almost any circumstance and achieve universal access, and that there's no credible strategy to actually bring everybody online without a public access component. And so my final comment is that the purpose and the value of universal service funds to actually achieve universal service can be most effectively invested to reach public institutions, notably libraries, and that can serve as a backhaul for build out of community networks. Together, it's to optimize the investment and really achieve a goal that we've been working for a long time. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. And one of the things that Don and I also talk about is what can happen when you can take the connectivity that a library has to the next level. And when you can put real super fast broadband into the public library, the services that the library can offer just, really go out through the roof. So certain libraries in the US have very big pipe coming in, libraries in Finland, and that's where you can really kind of take things, as I say, to the next level. If you want to just say quickly on that.
Yes, quickly. It's exactly right, Stuart. And there's one more thing that you can do once you have high capacity backhaul is that you can extend it beyond the library using wireless technologies. I think now are available in Kenya. TV White Space is a open wireless technology that some libraries are using to support remote library access points, fixed points around the community to further make this critical service convenient for more patrons.
Now I'm going to return to our panelists for any last comments. We had a remote question which was about how we drive people who hold the universal access funds towards libraries, and I think we covered some of that in the interventions from Paul and Emmanuel. Any sort of final observations? And Valencia as well, I know you've obviously been sitting here listening to the things and you've done the piece of research, and I have to say that they've put the main dynamic coalition session where we have to report back in 3 minutes. So it's not a great piece of scheduling, but let's take some final comments.
Well, one final comment here would be that the Dynamic Coalition does have a plan to continue working on this piece of research, and our plan or our goal is to follow up and move on from studying simply the policy outcomes to go more closer to the ground and see how these policies are being implemented. So moving on from assessing outputs to impacts, and I believe that the conversation that has been here today will be able to inform our thinking as to what kind of questions we're supposed to ask. So, for example, when discussing the role of libraries in broadband policies, it would be a good idea to see where exactly they fall within government authorities. That is something that can arise from today's conversation. We can ask questions about sustainability, we can ask questions about how the implementation took place and what the impact has been for the community and what potential has it created for further action. So many thanks for the conversation that took place today, and if any of you have been inspired today to put forward some ideas as to what we should be looking at for the implementation, we would welcome these suggestions.
Thank you, Stuart. One of the things I discovered when I visited the libraries was that they enable more sharing of facilities, of the internet and computer facilities that we put in the communities. At the Rural Communication Development Fund, we've done a lot of projects with secondary schools where we put an ICT lab in a secondary school. But you find that when you do that, it's only the school and the school community which benefits from the facility. But at one of the libraries I went to in central rural Uganda, I found that 2 schools actually use the library for their computer studies because the schools don't have computer facilities. So in addition to the community, general community using the libraries, we had 2 schools, 2 secondary schools using the libraries. So this means that if we have more intervention in the libraries, then we have more benefits, many more people than, say, when we take the facilities to one school. So with these kinds of findings, we are more encouraged to do more of these kind of projects in other libraries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, as for me, maybe one of the things I needed to stress is that maintenance of this equipment within the libraries, given that they are placed in very rural areas, has proven to be quite a challenge. But what we've realized is that when you use local actors who are able to reach those centers very fast, then it eliminates the downtime in terms of response to any challenges which may occur within the libraries. And for sustainability, to me, I think, given that the synergies that come on board when the equipments or the CapEx cost has been met, you find so many actors that will come on board, thus allowing for sustainability of such projects to enhance accessibility. And then as we implement these projects, we need to have at the back of our mind that about 5% of our populations are people living with disabilities. So we need to integrate and carry with us persons living with disabilities by availing assistive devices or some of these equipments to allow them also to engage and also learn digital skills. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Ramuna Petuhovaite. I'm from Electronic Information for Libraries, and it happens that IFL has worked in Ghana, Kenya, Uganda with library authorities that managed to get USF funds. So if you want to talk about it, just come to me and I will tell you a secret.
Well, you heard it here first. Thank you very much, everybody.